We'll save this for posterity. Good evening. This is C14 section. We've made the switch. I enjoyed all your presentations this weekend. I had a great time. I thought it went extremely well. I was appreciative of all the hard work that you put in. Thank you again for a great weekend. So let's look at where we are. Today is February 26th. Case study Zoom 1. This was, you were to read the chapter in the law book and look specifically at arbitrary, capricious, those standards. Also, you were to look at the lesson plan for role of the principal in terms of your legal responsibilities, and also your 4 paradigms of ethics, that all cases should be viewed within those 2 documents. Every time that we have one of these case studies, you should look at the law and you should look at the ethical paradigm as your lens to view these cases. Housekeeping. Let's see. You're to start your OMA. Hopefully you're about through with your APSEL. You're to start your OMA. I've already gone over it with you again. I have a section in here that has the task and the prompts laid out, the template, and an example. So if you have any questions, I'll certainly be glad to entertain any questions that you have about the OMA at this time. Good. So I'll be looking forward to seeing some of those tasks come in. Some of you have already started. Thank you for that. All right, our other responsibilities center around our discussion board questions. And again, let me remind you, I'm not looking for you to write War and Peace as a response to me. What's important about these is that you do the work, and that the learning that you get when you go out and do these activities. The write-up doesn't have to be that long, doesn't have to follow APA. Just give me your thoughts from going out and doing these things. I read one today that was very concerning. Didn't sound like that the school was too much on the ball. And I get some back from schools that it's just everything is just like that. They can find their crisis plan. Everybody knows that it's online. They've got their local budget, everything, the federal, state, local monies are all accounted for. They do an inventory walkthrough. Everything is ready to go. They do them twice a month as required by the law. Twice a month, safety inspections that are to be done twice a month. Now, what's important about that safety inspection is when you get to be an AP, you'll be the low person on the totem pole. And that'll be one of your responsibilities. You already know that, I'm sure, because nobody wants to do that. So twice a month, you and the custodian are going to have to do that review. If your district does not have a checklist, I would recommend that you use this one or make your own. You need some kind of documentation when you go to court. We haven't spent our time together in class yet, and so, but I'll tell you right now, nobody can give you permission to break the law. Because it's been done that way forever, won't save you when you go to court. And there is tort liability in North Carolina since the early 90s. We all had to be trained as principal by Richard Schwartz. I believe that was 91 or 2. There was a case decided in Union County schools that administrators could be held financially responsible for things that go on in their building. And so not only will the school district and the school board be sued, you can be sued as well when things don't go well. And anybody can be sued at any time for any reason. The point of this course is not to tell you that I can help you to avoid having to go to court or getting sued. What I will tell you is my job is to make sure that you win when you go, that you don't lose. Now, I'm not telling you that everything that you see at your school will be perfect. That's not the point of the course. The course is to tell you how it ought to be done. so that you know the right way to do things when you get your shot, and that you're able to protect yourself, your future, and your families and your home, so that you won't lose those in a court action. That is my perspective on this course. Just like the OMA, I told you when I went over that with you originally. The point of the OMA is not to build a master schedule, duty roster, and supervision schedule. It's to build a legal master schedule, duty roster, and supervision schedule. The master schedule meets all the criteria of the school activity report that's filed electronically every month, along with the principal's activity report, the PAR, which is attendance, which is how you get your money in school districts. Money is allotted on a per pupil basis on the number that attend every month, and we'll talk about that more when we have our face-to-face class. But there's also a school activity report that is submitted every month for your school. And if you were to be in an audit situation, they would take that master schedule, and those kids better be with the teachers that you say they're with and in the numbers that you say that they are in. And you better be meeting the needs of all your exceptional children, all the things, all the laws, policies, the class size limits, the highly qualified teacher certification, all those things have to be met every month. And if you're out of compliance, that's one of those things that gets you in serious trouble. So the point of the OMA is to build a legal master schedule that is supported by the budget, and the budget and the master schedule support the school improvement plan. It's a triangle, as I told you earlier. You have to make sure in a school, your chief responsibility in school as a school administrator is to create a school improvement plan. It's by law. It's in that 288 section, 115C, 288. Your responsibility is to develop a budget and a school improvement plan and a master schedule. Those are all legal things that you have to do, and they have to support one another. You can't put in your school improvement plan that we're going to emphasize math this year, but then decrease the amount of math instruction that you give in your master schedule. You can't be outside of your class limits. You can't have people teaching out of field. All those things are in your master schedule. You can't not be serving your exceptional children's population and your other special populations. There are other populations other than, as I told you earlier, there are other populations other than EC. You've got your 504, you've got gifted, you've got exceptional children, you've got English as second language. You have all those federal programs that must come first in that rationale or that prioritization of the master schedule. So to build a legal duty roster and supervision schedule, duty roster being who's going to cover car duty, who's going to cover the bus lot, who's going to cover the lunchroom. As I told you, if you're at Garinger High School and the fight breaks out, if you had 100 teachers in there, it wouldn't help you. But when you go to court, you won't lose a negligence suit because somebody got hurt in a fight in the cafeteria. If you have less than one adult for every 45 students in a group activity like lunch or the gym or on the ball field, you're going to lose when you go to court. It's going to be negligence. Regardless that you couldn't have stopped it if you'd had 100 people, that's immaterial. You didn't have the proper number. And then supervision schedule, that's for your after-school activities, making sure that those are covered as well, that you have adequate supervision at those. And so all of those things are in your budget. Your facilities walk through or to meet that standard. You know you have to have a once-a-month fire drill. Little known fact, if you look at 288, that's as I told you, look at the role of the principal, that lesson plan for tonight. It also says you have to do twice a month safety inspections. You better have a written record, especially if you have a fire or somebody gets hurt trying to evacuate your school in an emergency situation. A door's blocked or chained or a door's left propped open and an active shooter comes in. You better make sure that you're checking your facility twice a month. And you need to know where your crisis plan is, make sure it's updated, that it has the proper communication protocols, also that it has rosters of classes so you know where kids are, and that everybody knows the protocol for emergency and employs that plan immediately. Over the weekend, it was mentioned about the last active shooter in Charlotte that was at Butler High School. Because of social media, the parents and other people knew before some people in the building. They did not enact their crisis plan. They didn't enact their crisis plan in a timely manner, and they didn't know who would speak to the press. And It became a mess. That's because they didn't have a plan and their plan was outdated and it didn't work their plan. So that was your activity for this week. Next week, your activity is to interview an administrator concerning human resources. Know all the things that are available in your district so that you can speak to those when asked. Generally, this is a referral situation. When teachers ask you, you don't enter into discussions about pay or compensation, but you need to know the right people and what your district offers in terms of employee assistance. We'll have you doing that next week.
Can you repeat what I'm really curious, that 1 to 45 in the cafeteria thing?
Yeah.
What policy is that? I'd have never heard that. That's awesome.
That's supervision. That's providing adequate supervision. That will be in your law book. Providing adequate supervision of students.
Cool. Okay, thank you. I didn't know if there was like a number.
The standard.
I don't think we do that. So
the standard in North Carolina is 1 to 45. That's why you will see PE classes with a limit of 45 on them. That is the standard in North Carolina, is 1 to 45. So if you've got 300 kids in the cafeteria at lunchtime, how many teachers should you have in there as well? Cafeteria, by the way, when you go to court, cafeteria staff don't count. If you've got 300 kids in the cafeteria, how many teachers do you need?
At least 6 or 7.
7.
Yeah.
Got to have 7 teachers in there. Now, they can bring their kids and have lunch, or the teacher assistant can bring them and have lunch, but there's got to be 7 employees that are not working in the cafeteria that have to be in there if you've got 300 kids. If you're, the problem with letting kids sneak down to the gym during the day in high school is you've got 90 kids and 2 teachers in there. Everything is good except if there's 4 or 5 extra ones, and you get outside of that 1 to 45 and somebody gets hurt, and somebody's able to prove that you had more than 90 kids with 2 instructors, you're in trouble when you go to court. Facts of the case won't matter. You are guilty of inadequate supervision. That's under the negligence clause. So those are things that you have to plan for in your daily schedule, in your master schedule, and you can't, as a rule, try to get by and not meet that, or just meet it every now and then, or have cases where you exceed it on certain days or at certain times. That'll be the time when something bad goes wrong. And it's just simply a number thing when you go to court. Did you have at least 1 adult for every 45 kids, yes or no? And that will be the case. That's one of those we'll have to settle as a district. We definitely don't want to go to court when we have one of those. That can end your career fairly quickly. To kind of finish up on weeks 2 activity, one of the things I want you to pay particular attention to is the hiring process in your district. As we'll cover when we're together, the Board of Education makes the hire. The principal recommends to the superintendent recommends to the board hires and fires. But there's a lot of things that have to happen in that process. You need to know who's going to advertise the job, who's going to conduct the review of the resumes, the background checks. One of the things that working in smaller districts is really time consuming is when you have to do a lot of that as the school principal. One of the good things about working in Charlotte-Mecklenburg was we had human resources analysts, and when they referred somebody out to us, they'd already checked their references, their resumes, and they'd already done a preliminary background check on them, and they were eligible to be hired. One of the things that's really aggravating in the smaller districts is calling references, doing resumes and having people in and interviewing them, recommending somebody for the job, and then finding out that they're not eligible to be hired because there's something in their background or there's a problem with their certification or licensure. I can name you a half dozen times in my career when I worked in 4 districts in my career, 2 large and 2 small. The 2 small districts, I could name you any number of times when there was a problem with somebody we wanted to hire. We didn't find it out until they were recommended. Then you have to go and start all over again. A young lady was hired in Rutherford County when I was working in those schools. And she was actually hired and put on the job before they even started doing her background check and calling for her transcripts and those things. Come to find out, she only had a 2-year degree and didn't even have a teacher's license. She had falsified that on her application, and they hadn't bothered to check and follow up. That went really badly for us. We had to rebate her salary to the state. That did not go well. Had other situations. I might have told you this one. If I have, stop me, about my fraternity brother from undergraduate school and calling me when I was in central office at CMS wanting to know why his daughter couldn't be hired. Did I tell you that story? I hadn't heard from him in 31 years, and he called me up out of the blue, and he said, and how he found out who I was or where I was, I have no idea. But he called me up out of the blue, had my cell phone number, and said, how you doing? We did a little, I thought, something for alumni or something, because it was 30 years. And he said, I'm calling to see why my daughter's not been hired, why y'all hadn't hired my daughter. I said, I don't know what you're talking about, but give me some background on it and I'll find out. He said, well, my daughter, she came south just like I did. He was an attorney. He was from Maryland, but his daughter, and he got through undergraduate school, he went back to D.C. to Catholic University and got his law degree, was a practicing attorney in Maryland. His daughter had come south to UNC Charlotte and got a degree in elementary ed and had applied in CMS, which had 700 openings at any one time, but couldn't get hired. She couldn't even get an interview. He said, why can't she even get an interview? He said, people will love her if she can get an interview. Well, I explained the process. I said, she has to go through the background check, verification, all those things before she can be referred out to a school for an interview. I said, there must be some problem in her background check. Oh no, she's my good child. She's just wonderful. She's perfect. I said, well, let me go see. So I went over to the folks who do and called HR, and they referred me back over to my own department, to the police department for the background check. I went over and talked to the assistant chief of we had a little police department there in CMS, and that did our background checks. And he said, Lord have mercy. He said, we could never hire her. Said, she's got a felony conviction for assault on government officials, DUI, drug possession, all while she was in college out at UNCC. Said she had 3 incidents. Any one of the 3 in her background would keep her from being hired. And so I called him back up and I said, why didn't you tell me about, those, she was just young. Those were just minor things. I said, she'll never get a job in North Carolina. She might can go somewhere else to a private or a charter school, but she's never going to get hired by a public school. She can't pass the background check. The sad part is some small districts, that would just take your word for it. But even those, because of social media now, we can't take your word for it anymore. So there's a process to get hired. How's it work in your district? Make sure you know that. Now, you may get your first job in another district, but asking these questions along the way will help you so you'll know who to ask and what the process is when you go to wherever your district where you're going to get your first job is. You need to make sure you don't step outside of that protocol. You do not want to hire somebody inappropriate or recommend somebody that you think is a wonderful person only to find out that they've got some kind of a felony conviction or a class 4 misdemeanor conviction that would preclude them from being licensed and being able to work in the state. So that's the important part of the week 2 activity. Any questions on week 1 activities, week 2 activities, the OMA, before we dive into our case study tonight? All right, who's going to go first? Who am I going to make the host and put their presentation on the screen? Give me a name. We're burning daylight.
I told you that I need to leave by 7, so you said that I needed to remind you.
All right, have you got your presentation up on your screen?
Yeah, Kendra has it. I don't know.
Kendra has it? Okay. Well, Kendra will be the host then. All right, let me find Kendra in my list here.
I have it up on mine too.
All right, so
let me move you down, or can I?
I'm going to make you the host.
Okay.
No, wait a minute. That's not right. I want to make. Yes, I'm gonna change it. And now I'm gonna stop my share. All right. And I'm gonna turn my video off just a second. Okay. Do you see on your dashboard where you can share your screen?
Let me escape out because I can't see.
You got to be in full screen mode now. You can't have anything else up other than your presentation.
Okay, so now I'm about to share my screen and then collapse this down.
That's correct.
I just lost it. Okay. I'll share this screen. Okay.
All right. There we go.
Awesome.
All right.
Okay, so my group, do I get started? I guess I'll start it off. My slides are a little further down. Are we all on? I apologize for my voice.
Yes,
Perfect.
yes.
You're on.
Yes, I'm on the side of the road, but go.
Perfect. Okay, so we did the case study that was in our leadership book, as well as on our Blackboard. So we'll start with our first slide, the principal's course of action. And that will go to,
I will work on that.
it's all you.
Thank you. Okay, so this is what we discussed. For the substantive due process, which is the rules shall be fair in and of themselves, the policy is clear because it says basically that is as part of the school policy to maintain standards of personal honesty, cheating of any kind may require a failing grade by the teacher. So the policy is clear. The teacher informs the principal and is telling him that she expects the policy to be applied. Bobby and his mom, there is documentation of Bobby and his mom's signature of the letter that acknowledges that they know the contents of the student's handbook. And also, to be fair, although Mr. Michael's nephew is, well, Mr. Michael is very important in the district, his nephew also needs to receive the consequences because he was cheating. He admitted to be cheating. That is regarding the substantive due process. But procedural due process, it means that the policy's rules and regulations shall be carried out in a fair manner. There was a hearing conducted by the teacher. The boy admitted to have plagiarized his brother's project. What needs to be done? Probably a parent-teacher administration conference where the student explains again what happened and the parent is there to support the boy. And also the school needs to provide a notice of consequences according to school policy and the discussion of consequences for a student if the case is to go to summer school. So that was the part that we analyzed for the courses of action and due process. Also, we look for the definition of standards of arbitrary and capricious, and this is the definition we found: a clear error of judgment. Can you click to the next one, please?
Yes.
Ines. A clear standards of arbitrary and capricious. The definition we found online was a clear error of judgment, an action not based upon consideration of relevant factors, and so is arbitrary, capricious, and abuse of discretion or otherwise not in accordance with law, or if it was taken without observance or procedure by law. So we thought that the principle, there is no fault from the principle because the policy is clear. The teacher is strict, but she's applying the policy. However, as an instructional leader at the school, we would say that what about talking with the teacher to see how she followed up with the project, because according to the text, the project was a big part of the final grade. So what kind of checkpoints, we were talking about checkpoints during the weekend. So what kind of checkpoints she used to verify the progress in the project? And if the boy was behind, if she called the parent to inform that the student was at risk of failing, and if there was a kind of prior discussion of consequences with the parent and the student. And if the principal had that conversation with the teacher, and the teacher has documentation that she has spoken with the family, with the parent and the boy about this situation, because if there was nothing like that, maybe applying the policy strictly is not really that fair. Anyway, the principal has to support the teacher and the school policy.
First of the ethical paradigms was justice, and dealing with the fairness. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I was making sure that it wasn't acting up in here. They apply to this case because the student handbook clearly outlines the policy, although it says may, I think it was worded as may face failure. Still have to look at that. Is the possibility of him failing. It applies to all students in the school, whether your parent is on the board or your uncle is on the board or not. So that policy still applies to Bobby. Bobby and his parents agreed to the policy when they actually signed the handbook form and sent it back. And also when it comes to Bobby's uncle, I'm sure as a board member, he had to review the student handbook as well. So he knows the possible consequences of such actions. So as far as justice is concerned, Bobby will have to face whatever consequences come his way, regardless of him saying that baseball is taking up a good bit of his time. As a student athlete, he has to understand how to better manage and prioritize his time.
The next paradigm was on care, and I took it from a little bit of a different standpoint, because when you think about loyalty and trust, you think about the teacher did not likely trust the decisions that the principal made, because she already had the union rep involved early in their discussions. Also, the loyalty of the staff. I think that depends on how the staff feels about the grading process and the syllabuses that are already in place, because it's a lot to have one project to weigh over 50% of a student's grade, and for it to be an out-of-school assignment. As far as concern and connection, I think that the principal and the teacher should talk about how much the actual project weighed on the final grade, because Bobby may not be the only person in that same situation. Even though he was the one who was caught cheating, that doesn't mean that everyone else passed that final, passed that project. So there may be other people who are in the same situation who may have done well in the class, but did not do well on the actual project. And nurtured and encouraging. I think, like Mabel said, it's important that you would have checkpoints along the way for this type of project, because they're still I believe they were in high school, correct? In high school, so they still need a little bit of guidance through a major project. As far as relationships, I think there should be a better relationship between the principal and the teacher, because the teacher never came and addressed him by herself. The dean came, and then she came, but she came with a union rep. As far as collaboration, I think that there should be a review of all of the syllabus and the weights of the different projects. And then I'm sure you all have been reading some of the rest. As far as discipline, how does this rule apply to the school assignments that received help on? So how can we look at a way to help these people? And also, when you sign for a handbook, yes, it is your signature, but did the teacher ensure that the part that was pertaining to her class that she reviewed at the beginning. I also wanted to look at the beginning of the lesson plan that we received, and the role of the principal is said to grade and classify pupils. One of the things that really stood out to me was the principal shall have authority to grade and classify pupils and determine the appropriate grade for a pupil who is already attending a public school. The principal shall consider the pupil's classroom work and grades and the pupil scores and standardized tests. So I think that's something that should be reevaluated as far as how much the assignment weighed, even though he did admit to cheating. And the last one I wanted to make was the prodding point. And she had that conversation with the student by himself. I think she should at least have someone else as a witness to her when he finally confessed to cheating.
This is me. I'm Critique. Sorry, I'm losing my voice a little bit. So when it comes to the paradigm of critique, I referenced one of the laws that was in the lesson plan where the principal has the ability to discipline students. He has that authority to exercise that discipline over policies adopted by the local board of education. I don't know why that's lost like that. So with that, we were thinking more about the corrupt morals piece. I was thinking about how that could tie to our text, the school leadership text, where there's that wiggly space, I believe the book calls it, between values, morals, and ethics, which are the stuff of leaders in administrative life. So to completely let this go and not have a consequence could be playing with that ethical piece and the moral piece and teaching the lesson to the student, as was mentioned earlier. Also, when it applies to the paradigm of profession, there's a law that talks about disciplining the student, excuse me, with reasonable force. So that touches on the idea of teaching Bobby a lesson about cheating. But not only just teaching him a lesson, getting down to the causes and conditions of it and helping him not to repeat that behavior. That is part of the responsibility of a leader, which could come through the principal himself or through his staff with reasonable force. So also with that, when you look to the lesson plan and some of the pieces, I thought that touched on the accountability for student academics and social success. It's about modeling the principle of self-awareness for the principal himself. I mean, like, is this the type of school culture and climate that I want to be a part of or have permeate through the building where cheating is okay? And then the idea of equity came up because this student is a baseball player, but how would we react or respond to the garden variety student per se, who isn't part of any extracurricular activity, but faces the same dilemma of having cheated on an assignment? So also consider and evaluate the potential moral and legal consequences of the decision making. Well, because there is that gray area that was already mentioned by one of my peers, where it says the word may, there's that idea where the principal has that ability to make that decision, but you're playing with the moral versus legal ramification, but may gives you that wiggle room. And also the responsibility to respect are keys to making the decisions that are best for students. So once again, that lifelong lesson that can be taught. How can the student look back on this? Would the student look back on this experience moving forward when pressed with the opportunity to cheat again, whether it's on taxes or a spouse or a job application? Will that student rely on the lesson that could have been taught back in his secondary career to possibly make the right choice moving forward? So in that case, it would be the best, we focus on what's best for that student. I believe that's the end of our presentation.
All right, go back to the first page. Let's do our review now. Are all of you teacher level folks?
Kendra's outside of the building, right?
Kendra, what do you do?
I'm an instructional coach with elementary schools.
Okay, instructional coach, yeah. But none of the four of you that worked on this are administrators. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Y'all did an excellent job for teachers. Not so much for administrators.
Okay.
Okay.
You did about what I would expect teachers to do, but you missed the boat for administrators. We missed it on every turn. So let me work through this one with you.
Please
All right.
do.
Tinker versus Des Moines in '69 said that you have to give students due process. And part of that due process is you have to weigh the evidence. You have to give them the chance to present their side of the story, and that you must meet the standards of arbitrary and capricious. Arbitrary means if Finance and I get caught smoking, they tell Finance he's going back to class and they send me home for a 5-day suspension. That would be arbitrary. We weren't the same. Capricious is when you give too much punishment for the crime. This is a case of capricious. Very clear, very simple one for administrators. If you look at Dale's top 10, and I've got it pulled up and I'll show it to you in a minute, number 6 or 7 reminds you, as you should have in your reading, zero tolerance policies are illegal.
Oh, I saw that.
The effect of this policy was that one test grade should not fail a student. You can fail the EOC or EOG and still pass the class. The effect, whether it was legislated or not, in this case was failing one assignment should not fail you for the year in a class. And if that happened, that would be a zero tolerance policy. Zero tolerance are if you do this, we do that. We don't. What zero tolerance means is we don't care about due process. Your side of the story, extenuating, none of that matters. We do that. In this case, he cheated. He failed for the year. That's zero tolerance. That is illegal. That means you have not given him his procedural due process. So in this case, as you pointed out, the principal assigns the grade. So the principal's not clear here. Go to your next slide. Principal has to support. No, the teacher does not. The principal does not have to support the teacher here. The teacher has made a capricious decision here, and brought in zero tolerance. And the principal's responsibility is to grade and classify students, not teachers. They recommend their grades, and the principal signs off on them. And this idea of no fault from the principal because the policy is clear, it's exactly wrong. It's completely the fault of the principal because the principal is the one that legally assigns the grades. Now, I know that teachers want to be supported by their principals, but you can only be supported when you're in the right. That's part of the ethical paradigm as well. We don't support teachers when it's illegal just because we feel this need. We have to do justice. In this case, the part of the ethical paradigm that was violated by the school was the ethic of justice. We know without even having to go to court that zero tolerance is illegal. You'll lose every time. Your district will settle before it gets to court. Now, this one threw some frills at you to distract you.
Yeah.
Say, hey, look over here, his uncle, school board, all that stuff. He plays baseball. That was just to distract you from what was clearly a case of a capricious zero tolerance policy. That's the heart of this case. You can't fail a kid for the year for cheating on one assignment. That's capricious. That's zero tolerance. You know, some teachers I know, when you take a kid to the office, the only thing that's going to satisfy some teachers is if you immediately take the kid out back and shoot him right now. That's the only thing that's going to satisfy them. But you can't do that. You can't get yourself in a situation as a school administrator where you let teachers pressure you into doing things that are illegal and unethical. This violates the ethic of justice. It also violates the standard of capricious, because that means the kid didn't get his due process. A zero tolerance policy was enacted upon this kid, which is illegal. Go to your next slide. Justice. A justice applies to this case. And not justice on, yeah, he needs to learn a lesson for cheating. He needs to get a failing grade on this activity and have to repeat this activity. But, you know, this is taking a shotgun to, you know, to a fly, failing for the year. This one is a really easy one. It's clear cut. And so in the end, this case is about arbitrary and capricious. I gave you those hints. It's about due process. It's about making sure that, see, if you enact a zero tolerance policy on a kid, that says we suspend due process. We're not going to do it. Are you aware that you can't expel a kid from public school for life? The longest you can do is exclude a kid for 1 year, no matter what he's done, and every kid has the right to petition to come back after 1 year. Because expelling a kid for life would be zero tolerance, and those are illegal. That doesn't mean you have to let him back in after a year, but certainly, you know, zero tolerance is illegal. So if you will, I will make myself the host again. Let me go back to participants, reclaim host. I am now the host. I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to go back to my screen and share. I've got a document here. This is Dale's top 10 for administrators. Number 6, this is in your materials. Zero tolerance policies are not legal. All right? Because they violate due process. All right, so that's number 1 thing to look at. Number 2, I have this one. This is from a presentation the first half of this class. Now, I will have to admit, there's an administrator in this group. This is the only group that's got it right so far. Due process, substance, and procedural. First thing you have to look at is zero tolerance. Is it a zero tolerance? May in the policy, what's best for the student justice. This kind of sums it up right here. But again, standards of arbitrary and capricious. This was Michelle. You know that she does discipline at West Charlotte. This is what she does every day. She got it immediately. She got it immediately because that's what she does. But the notion here is I am happy with what you folks have done. You did what I expect you to do as teachers, but you've got to change your lens to administration now. And the way you look at these things has to completely change. You can't look at it from the side of the teacher anymore. Now you must look at it from the role of the principal, and your job is to uphold the law and policies. That's your job. If you don't do that, you get in trouble and your school district gets in trouble. And so you have to look at the standards of arbitrary and capricious. Capricious act like this, zero tolerance is a capricious act. It eliminates the possibility of due process, and it eliminates the paradigm of justice, the ethical paradigm of justice, because it's not a just decision. So that's the bottom line in this case. Without being an administrator, you look at things differently. Even though you read these materials that I gave you, you look at them from a different lens than I do. I can't go back and look at them. Now, here's the bad part of this. Now, once you learn it from this side, you can't go back. You'll always look at them from this side of this side of the desk. So that's one of the things that's the downside to this is you'll start looking at things like an administrator. But that's what you have to do if you're going to make that successful transition. You have to look at them from a legal and policy standpoint, not in terms of I'm going to support the teachers or, you know, he needs to learn a lesson and those are all good things, but that's from a teacher perspective. Administrator perspective, we got to follow the law. You know, he was probably pardon my language, he was probably a turd and deserved it, but that's immaterial. That's not the law. You know, unfortunately, we don't, you know, guilty people don't get punished as much as they ought to be every day, but we can only go to the extent of the law. My favorite story to tell in this case is I did a due process hearing for a student at Providence High School. When we had the serious cases, I would go out and do them myself. I represented myself as my own, obviously I was my own legal counsel. The district had the associate general counsel, and the student, who was 18 years old, by the way, had his own attorney present. And we had a due process hearing. He brought 2 knives to school, and they weren't pocket knives. And he had malice in his heart. He brought them with bad intent. And so he got the knives out. He was able to be wrestled to the ground by the SRO. Nobody got hurt. He was charged with possession of a weapon, and he went to his due process hearing. He had a 10-day suspension and a recommendation for exclusion. We advised them of their rights before we start. Everything you say can and will be held against you in a court of law when you have your court case. We're here to make an educational determination about your placement. Will you get to come back to school after? Will you get sent to an alternative school, or will you be excluded for a year? Those were the possible things that could happen as a result of this hearing. 99.999 times when an attorney comes and represents a student, especially in a case like that, they advise the student not to testify. The fellow that came looked like he was just out of law school, and if you can remember the movie Revenge of the Nerds, the guy that played the character Booger, he looked just like Booger from Revenge of the Nerds. The attorney did. And I think I saw the scab on his booster shot. I mean, he was just a kid. And he let the kid testify. And the kid testified that he brought the knives and planned to use them. And I was like, I can't believe I'm hearing this. I swore the kid in. I mean, I'm recording this. I've already advised him, don't testify against yourself. The attorney has him tell the whole story. And when we get through and go to closing arguments, the attorney says, this case should be thrown out on the basis of he was given, the punishment given was capricious. And he presented his case to me that the 10-day suspension and a disciplinary exclusionary hearing was capricious in that the code of conduct, the limit allowed was a 5-day suspension for what he had done. And he was really upset when I pointed out to him that he was using the elementary code of conduct, not the secondary code of conduct, which allowed for a 10-day suspension and an exclusionary hearing, which he was a part of at that time. The attorney at that time tried to strike his client's testimony from the record, and which you cannot do. But he was going to, be Clarence Darrow and swoop in and grab victory from the jaws of defeat by claiming that what the school had done was capricious. They had followed the handbook for secondary students. We were in a high school. It didn't go well for the young man. The parents ended up suing the law firm for, inadequate representation. The kid ended up having to spend some time in jail because he admitted that he brought knives and attempted to murder somebody with them. It didn't go well for them. Now, as a result, our district decided that we might better make one handbook to avoid being sued ourselves. And so we made one handbook from that point on. But this young attorney had just downloaded a code of conduct from the website, the district website, and just had randomly picked the elementary rather than the secondary. So my point is there's real consequences in these cases. People will take you to court. People will go to hearings. You must follow the law. Even though you know that Bobby might be a turd and needs, and probably summer school would do him good. And, that's immaterial. The law is clear. Capricious acts like zero tolerance policies deny students due process and are illegal.
So what's the solution? So
The solution is that he gets the zero on that. He gets the zero on that, and that's averaged into his grades and whatever his grades are. But it can't count enough that it fails.
okay, so like if it was a project grade that was 50% of his grade, theoretically
It can't
speaking,
be 50% of his grade.
but even if that was the worst case, he still could not fail.
That's
He could
correct.
have 100% on the other 50 and not fail. But so the second thing is the policy was wrong out the gate. So would it have been better for us to notice out the gate that this policy is unacceptable?
Exactly. You should have known right away. Wait a minute. But it did say may. It said it may fail you. And it may fail you. I mean, if you make, if you've got a
Yeah.
70 average, if you've been sucking by all semester long and you're on a 70 and you get a zero on an assignment that counts 5%, you're probably going to fail. So it may fail you.
So the policy is not wrong, but the teacher is wrong to say, I'm going to fail him.
That's right.
So
She
we need to
said,
talk to the
because
teacher.
you cheated, I'm failing you.
Okay,
There's nothing wrong with the policy.
okay.
The policy is what every district has. The teacher's interpretation of the policy basically precluded him from getting due process.
Okay.
It was capricious. Her interpretation of the policy was a capricious act. I'm failing you, zero tolerance, because you cheated on this one. Regardless of what his other scores or grades might have been, that wasn't in question. The question was, was it legal to fail him over cheating on this one assignment, regardless of how much it counted? And the answer is no. That's capricious. That denies you due process. That's why I said you can't just, some teachers, I mean, anything less than shooting them, they're not happy. But you can't go along with that because it's illegal. You'll end up losing your house because they'll sue you. Because in the end, you're the one that assigns grades. 115C 288G says the principal grades and classifies students.
Yeah.
Not teachers.
That's great.
So that's on you. They won't sue the teacher. They'll sue you.
I thought that grading the student was grade level. I read that all wrong. I thought that had to do with the grade level and placement,
Nope.
classification of that student.
Mm-mm.
Coming in, like, I'm going to take these credits and make them a senior, even though on paper he's a sophomore.
How long ago did you work at Garinger?
That was 07 to 11.
20 years before that, they had a principal. His name was Scrow. Russell Scrow, S-K-R-O-W or whatever. You know why Russell got fired as principal at Garinger? Because he changed athletes' grades. But his contention is that he was allowed to do that because principal grades and classifies. So his defense is I'm allowed to do that, but as it was found out, his actions were not warranted because the teachers had turned in that some of the kids had not done any work at all, and so he could not show any reason as to why. So although legally he was allowed to do that, on the ethical piece, the ethic of profession, they fired him basically for unethical behavior. He failed on that standard. But his argument was, and he was quite open about changing the grades. I'm allowed to do this. The law says that I can. And the district said, yes, the law says you can, but the ethic of the profession says that you won't. He sued the district and lost because that was an ethical violation to change grades without any evidence of why he should be doing that.
Okay.
I miss Russell. We gave him a hard time. He was the first guy I knew that got a hairpiece. He got that HRS hair replacement system out there on Eastway Drive. They sewed a piece on the back of his head looked like a horse's tail. And every time it rained, it'd stand straight up. Every time he'd come by, I'd whinny at him. True story. Um, long ago and far away, though. But anyway, that's absolutely so. So even if you are allowed to change grades as a principal, then you have to meet the ethic of profession and have a reason why you would do that. You can't just do it arbitrarily. Again, it must meet the ethic of profession if you want to change a grade. Questions you have so far? Are we having fun yet?
Well, I feel I failed completely.
No, you didn't fail completely. You got all you hit all the right notes. For a teacher, you hit all the right notes. And this is my expectation on this first one. As I said, now Michelle's just an outlier because she's actually in the job. In her presentation, she hit the nail, but her group's the only one that's gotten it so far. Everybody else it's been just like y'all. So that was but you worked through the right steps, and that's what's important. So you did not fail. That you made a 50 on this assignment, you'll grow out of it. No, y'all all did great. You'll get your 100 on this assignment. It's a learning curve. It's hard. I'm telling you, it's hard to change your lens. It sounds like it'd be easy. It's not. And I'm glad that it's not easy, because we want people who are caring and who have that teacher mentality, that care and giving, caring, feeling. That's the kind of people we want working with our students on a daily basis. You have to get hard to be an administrator, and that's not always good. I tell the story that I decided, that I could move into a small unit, a small district as a superintendent, or I could retire and come to work for Gardner Webb. I had two offers. I decided to come to work for Gardner Webb because I didn't like who I'd become as an administrator. I'd become very hard and heartless. And I was in the process of dismissing an employee when he killed himself. And my first thought was, well, that'll save me a lot of paperwork. And I thought, wow, I got to stop. This is not who I want to be. So I admit quite freely that I'm still Saul on the road to Damascus. I'm not Paul yet, because I did this too many years. And you get really hard doing this. It hardens your heart. And that's not who I wanted to be, so I chose to do something else. But over the years of doing this, you'll have to do things that you don't want to do and don't like to do. But we want our teachers to still have the heart for children. And changing your lens is difficult. If it's not difficult, you probably don't like kids anyway. But the harder it is to change your lens, to look at things from an administrative perspective, the more you care for kids and the better you are in a classroom situation. And I appreciate that. And I'm glad that we have people who do get this wrong. If you didn't get this wrong, that would mean that you're probably not caring as much for your students as you need to.
So what's your suggestion, Dr. Lamb? Like how do we start analyzing this in a better way? Just start from the.
You start from the law. Don't get distracted by things like, look at what action was taken, and look at only the action. Don't look at the personalities involved. Don't think about the teacher. Don't think about the uncle on the school. Look at the action involved. I mean, when you go to court, that's all that matters. What action was taken here? Well, this kid was failed for cheating on one project. Does that sound right to you? What does the law say? The law says, no, that's capricious. Zero tolerance. That means you're denying a kid his due process. That can't be right. The teacher wants you to shoot him. That can't be right either, but somewhere in between. But you have to look at the action. When we get to the case study about the LGBTQ, the two gay students, when we get to that one later, that one has all kinds of bells and whistles that distract you from the central theme of that one. And in the end, it goes back to, on that one, you allowed behavior between two male students that you wouldn't allow between a male and a female. And that's where your problem started. I've told you before, I had a male student who wore a dress to high school back in the 90s when it wasn't nearly as popular as it is now. Now, I made him go home one day because of his dress, not because he was wearing a dress, but his dress was too short. I wouldn't let a girl wear one that short, and so I wouldn't let him wear one that. So you got to wear a knee-length dress. He came in with a little summer a little summer dress on the next day, that came down to his knees, and everything was fine again. All was right in the world. But you can't come in the dress you're going to wear to the club tonight. Can't do that, boy or girl. And so that's the notion here, is you got to remember what the law or the policy is. You got to go strictly on what is the core problem in this. You have to identify that. And once you're able to do that without putting in it personalities or getting distracted by your own feelings of what you think ought to be right and wrong, just like the two boys in the case study that want to go to the prom, it's not about two boys going to the prom together. It's about it's about antecedent behaviors. You didn't stop the little things, and now they've become the big things. And so you can't all of a sudden go back and make up for lost time, and try to correct things that you didn't do in the past. You should address this early. That's the central problem in the one with the two boys that want to go to the prom, is you allowed them to kiss and hold hands and do all these PDAs and inappropriate touching and inappropriate displays of public affection, which is in the code of conduct and in the state reporting manual, that is a violation of school policy. You didn't call them on it then, and they've gotten more and more bold, and now you're in an emergency situation where we can't let you go to prom. Well, you're going to have to, but you should have dealt with their behavior before. But again, that one comes up. So all these cases, there's going to be more to it than it looks like. But the real issue is to find the central problems in all of them and look at it from a legal perspective and then from an ethical perspective and apply your standards to it. We'll look at next week's case study when we get done. All right. Good job by this group. Who's going to be our next person who shares their presentation with us tonight? Whose screen am I going to now?
Now they are afraid of showing you.
Do what?
Now they are scared of showing you the presentation.
Why not?
All wrong.
I'll share. Or speak, but I'll share. Let me. Okay, what do I do?
All right, I'm going to stop my share. You can now share your screen from your dashboard.
It's right here. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay.
Very good.
All right, Marlene, hit it.
Okay, so I'm listening to you guys talk, and I kind of looked at it from not so much a legal standpoint, but I looked at the last part of the case, and I saw what the superintendent said to the principal, and then that kind of threw me another way, saying that I don't know if I was like,
again, that's a distraction. You're supposed to ignore that.
I looked at it and I was like, but he was saying how much sports is to the community and all of that. So that kind of led me to the stance that I took. So the course of action, what should the principal course of action be? I basically said that it should be one that refuses to carry through on the policy. I'm thinking the decision should be made in the best interest of students. So the decision to support such policy will affect Bobby greatly. As we have said before, it's going to weigh heavily on his grades, more than 50%. So that's part of my reasoning behind not upholding the policy per se. And then when it gets to due process, I explained that a little bit. The administrator's decision must be fair and just. To adhere to due process, the following steps, in my mind, would have to be taken. notification of the alleged charges. There would have to be a thorough investigation, for instance, getting more information from the teacher, probably having a hearing to make sure that it's free of bias. And then I also said the kid would have to present his side of the story if they went into a court of law. As with many cases, I said some defendant can easily change their story to say they didn't, as somebody else said, the teacher didn't have a witness. I mean, he said, he confessed, but what if he changed his story? Not to bring politics in this, but as with the case of Governor Northam, I remember when that story came out, the night before he apologized, and then the next day he came back and said it was not him in the picture. So I kind of thought about that. What if the child said, no, I didn't confess to it, I didn't, say I did it. So arbitrary, looked up the definition, and a rule is arbitrary if it's not supported by logic or facts. So the conclusion I drew from that, administration has to be careful, as there's room for negotiation, and the book talks about wiggle room. Capricious, a rule is capricious if it's not adopted without thought or reason or is irrational. And
that means too much. If it's too much, if the punishment doesn't fit the crime,
right,
that would be capricious.
Right. So, and then I said, conclusion, there's protocol in place for cheating, so failing is not out of the question. So that's kind of where I went with it in terms of whether or not they should follow through or basically upholding the punishment. And as the other group has said, it was a bit much. It's 50% of the grade.
There you go. See there you've hit the nail on the head.
And then
good in these.
While I was waiting here, I looked in the text too, and I saw that zero tolerance policy, and then that kind of drove me to that point too. So that's the stance we kind of took from there on. And somebody else will talk to you guys a little bit about the ethical paradigms.
Hello? Wait. I can't see. I can't. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. So yeah. So looking back at the ethical paradigm of justice, we decided was it really fair with the 50%? We need to make sure that when we give these kinds of assignments that we're holding up, that like you said, a student not failing based on one complete assignment.
Do we understand the difference between de facto and de jure, by the way?
No.
Not quite.
Okay. Let me explain that standard to you.
Okay.
De facto, if you assign 50% of the grade to one, you haven't legislated that the kid fails if he fails that one, but in fact he will fail. De jure is when you say he's going to fail. When de jure means that we have a policy in place that says if you do this, you fail. And then what was going on with this teacher? The teacher knew she couldn't do that because she knew that zero tolerance was illegal. But she set the standard so high, the percentage so high on that one, that if you failed it, you failed the course. So she might as well have said, if you fail this, you fail the course. She stopped short of that because she knew that would not fly. That would be zero tolerance. But de facto, it's a zero. The percentage, the weight of that one activity was so high. De facto, it was a zero tolerance policy. It didn't say it was, but again, the standards of de facto and de jure in the law is that I don't have to say it if I do it. De facto means
custom. Like custom
you're failing me over this one, even though you're not saying you are. The facts are because of this one, you're failing me. Whether it's de facto or de jure, that's the same standard in the law. You can't do that.
Right.
And you need to Google those two if you're not familiar with them, but you can't do that. So in effect, this was a zero tolerance policy, hidden, somewhat cloaked, but in fact it was. It didn't say zero tolerance, but it if it walks it has feathers and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck.
So we have like policies in our school about this, and our students we have a minimum and a maximum number of grades to ensure that this policy is met, and then we have agreed upon percentages by department, because we know that sometimes, math and English might be different, but by department, to ensure that nothing is one category even can't fail a child. So like
there you go.
We can't have our tests and projects category be more than 30%, because if they failed the test and projects category, then they would basically, if it was more than that, they would basically fail. So when I put that question in there, I didn't realize that was what due process was or whatever, the wording of that, but I knew that there was no way you could have 2 grades.
Well, arbitrary and capricious standards. If you do something that's arbitrary or capricious, you in effect circumvented the due process rights of that student. You've said this is going to happen to you. I don't care what the extenuating circumstances are. I don't care what the percentages are. It doesn't matter. If you do this, I'm failing you. Well, that's zero tolerance. That means you don't get your due process. Now, what you were just talking about, your department goes through, that's called due diligence. Due diligence is part of that substantive due process is due diligence. Let me say that again. What Cynthia just thankfully brought to the floor here and just explained about what her departments go through, and thank you for bringing that, that's called due diligence. You do your due diligence to make sure that you have allowed these students to have their due process, that you have not arbitrarily or capriciously denied them their due process rights. You can't fail them over one section. They passed everything else, but then one section, you weighted it so heavily that you have denied them their due process rights. You have made it a zero tolerance, whether you called it that or not. If you called it that, that'd be de jure. And if you just assign so much weight to it that it failed them automatically, that would be de facto. But due diligence is what your group is doing, whether you know that's the name or not, when you set and make sure that you've weighted all the assignments correctly. In most high schools, you drop the lowest one anyway. And so this one would get a 0, and in most high schools, the 0 would be dropped for that very reason, to make sure that we didn't factor that 0 in, which would almost make a kid fail. That's what due diligence is. Due diligence is the work that you do to ensure that students get due process. Anybody remember the case that I cited to start this whole thing tonight from 1969?
Is it Tinker versus Des Moines?
Tinker versus Des Moines, 69. And it was over Vietnam era protests in high school.
Yeah.
And they were just throwing those kids out, and they said, no, they get due process. You might can put them out, but they've got to have due process. And it can't just be over this one thing. It was a zero tolerance. If you come with an anti-war T-shirt or participate in in some act of civil disobedience tied to the war, we're going to kick you out of school. It's exactly the same as this case. It's just the particulars are just different, but it's exactly the same case. That's why I picked this one. It is the standard case for due process. A zero tolerance is the standard case for due process.
And in my mind too, it could be done with a little bit of malice too, in the sense.
Of course it was.
In the sense
that it was. The teacher, I mean, anything short of taking him out back and shooting him, she wasn't going to be happy.
And here's what I was looking at when I was kind of reading. I thought, for instance, you have teachers, and I've heard teachers say this, sports player, think they're all that and then some.
Yes.
How would you? So if it's your 4.0 girl who is in Model UN, part of the Honor Society, went to some cheerleading stuff and couldn't get her work done, copy your friend's work, how would that play out? Would you do the same thing? for
Oh,
that
no.
person. So it would be that zero tolerance that doesn't really exist.
Yeah,
So
and-
that it could be done with malice. So that was kind of
Now,
where I
what
was.
you just described is arbitrary.
Mhm.
That we would treat the Honor Society girl differently than we would treat Bobby. That would, again, that would fail the standard of arbitrary.
Right.
What we talked about in the beginning with, you know, Cynthia and I are out back smoking,
Right.
and you just send, because she's an honor student, you send her back to class, and everybody knows I'm in trouble all the time. I'm an agitator, so you send me home. Oh, and that reminds me, just as an aside here, therapeutic suspension is illegal as well. I always get that question. And ABC suspensions are illegal also. They fall under zero tolerance policies. Let me explain those to you. They're another function of zero tolerance. You've heard of therapeutic suspension, where we don't actually count it as a suspension. We just take a kid home or have his parents come pick him up for the rest of the day. And we call that therapeutic suspension. Is the reason why we don't record it and report it to the state. We don't count it off. That's illegal. And ABC, absence before conference, when we send a kid home on a suspension and tell him he can't come back till his parents bring him, that's illegal as well. You have to send him home for a defined period of time. It has nothing to do with parents coming back. Can't do that. Those are oldies but goodies. People are trying to do them again now. Those are making a comeback. They are illegal as well.
What about in-school suspension? Because I feel like my school kind of just drops kids in there and doesn't even always call parents.
Well, in-school suspension falls under the same category as out of school in terms of for exceptional children. For some reason, schools think that ISS doesn't count on their 10 days for the year. It does. And if you do ISS, you can put students in ISS, but it must be reported to parents, same as an out-of-school suspension. It falls under the same category because it's a change in educational placement. So you have to, in writing, generate a form out of PowerSchool, the official suspension form that says in-school suspension. You have to notify parents if kids are put in in-school suspension. Now, there's these little ISS rooms they call, what is it? ICU, and different terms, doesn't matter. If you remove them from their normal classroom, that's a change in placement. And parents have to be notified. For regular ed, it counts against your 10 days for special ed. You know that for the special ed kid, that if you change his placement for more than 10 days, you have to do a manifestation termination, the functional behavior assessment, and psychological, and update their IEP behavioral goals to go past 10 days. Now, here's a little oldie but goodie for you on that one as well. You get 10 days if a pattern is not shown. So what you'll have is you'll have stupid administrators who will say, we got 10 days. We'll give him 1 day every time he does this. Well, you ought to lose your job if you're that stupid. The third time, that's 3. 1, 2, 3. The third time an EC kid does the same thing, I don't care if you didn't give them but 2 days, 1 day apiece the first 2 times. The third time an EC kid does the same thing, he's shown a pattern, you go immediately to manifestation, termination, functional behavior assessment, psychological, and an update IEP. You go paperwork, you do your manifestation, termination immediately. If the third time a kid does the same thing, because he's showing a pattern. But schools are stupid and think, well, I'll just give him 1 day at a time. So it'll take him all year to do it 10 times. No. Somebody gets hurt the 8th or 9th time and you haven't been, and a pattern's been established, they'll take your house. You'll lose in court in a big way. Your job will be the least of your worries. So you know that say a kid brings a gun to school. And he's EC. You can give him the 10 days, but you still got to do the paperwork on him before you have his due process hearing. You still got to do the paperwork. You got 14 days to do it. You still have to do the manifestation determination, the functional behavior assessment, psychological and updated psychological and updated IEP before you can have the due process hearing, even if he brought a gun to school and shot somebody. You still have to do your paperwork. But if the kid shows a pattern, the third time he does the same thing, you've got to move on the paperwork. But all of these are part and parcel of arbitrary and capricious zero tolerance. They are an attempt to circumvent due process. Dropping kids in a room during the day and not telling their parents, that's an attempt to circumvent due process. You must notify parents so that they can make sure that their kid is being treated fairly and legally and ethically.
Well, the ISS room is right by the guidance office, so I'm just going to have to keep my door closed and not notice what's going on.
Well, can't do that. As long as you inform parents and do the paperwork, you can do it, but you can't do it just because and not tell people.
Yeah.
My favorite story is when I was a high school teacher a million years ago. There was, of course, obviously there was no such thing as air conditioning in those days. And they wanted to hire a young fellow that had student taught with us. They wanted to hire him as a coach. Didn't have a job for him, so we started ISS in the high school. Well, they didn't have a room for him either. So they took an old, those 3-story high school buildings that were all built in the late 1920s. And on the first floor, there was a hallway all the way down the middle of the building, and then classrooms on either side. And midway down, at one time, there had been an exit going out the side. Well, they had closed it over years ago, and there was a pretty wide hallway that went down there. And somebody said, we'll just wall that off and make Johnny a room right there. Well, they put an air conditioner. It was the only room in the whole school that had an air conditioner, and it wasn't very big. Width of a high school hallway would have held about 10 kids comfortably. I remember going up there one day for some reason. I opened the door. Johnny had about 50 kids in there. Every kid in the building had an infraction wanting to go to the room that had the air conditioner. They were sitting in one another's laps, looked like a bus in Bangladesh. The ISS room. So ISS didn't really work out for us. It was, I think back on how illegal that whole deal was. But, that was a different time. If you were to do that now, they'd just take you out back and knock you in the head. You'd lose everything you own if you did something that stupid nowadays.
Now, is ISS right up there with, we have schools where kids just sit in the front office all day and don't get processed?
No, that may not be de jure. That may not be the policy written down, but that's a de facto suspension. Okay. You changed their educational placement.
Yeah.
You go to court and argue that that's the right thing to do for kids. See how far that gets you.
It's not. We've all seen it happen, but I agree it's not right.
But every time you see something going on in your building, you think, I wonder if that's right or not. Think about you're the person that has to go and represent your school district in a court of law and try to explain this to people and make it sound rational and reasonable. Would you want to be the person that had to go and try to argue that that's the right thing to do for that kid? Have him sit in office all day?
No.
The only thing that'd be worse than that is if we had him help the custodian. Maybe we could teach him to mop and sweep. It's the same thing.
That's like those kids that are the unofficial front office helpers just
right.
in the classroom.
No. So you folks are not old enough to remember, but I am, unfortunately. I started school before integration, and then I saw what happened during integration, and I also did my schooling years before 94, 142, and I saw kids that needed to be in a special ed that needed assistance, and basically they just worked with the custodian every day. That's what they did. They came to school and worked with the custodian every day. They cleaned the cafeteria and taught them to mop and sweep. You think about some of the things that we used to do. I was telling Elizabeth, I saw that thing this weekend. I was driving to class Saturday morning, and they had Casey Kasem's Top 40 on from 1975. They were telling the story of Tony Orlando, and they kept referring to his sister as mentally retarded. That we used to do a lot of things that were done back in the day. Some worse than others, but you can't get away with those kinds of things nowadays. If you do things that are arbitrary, capricious, zero tolerance, if you do these things, whether you have a written policy or not. If you do them, somebody will know, you'll be found out, and things will go very badly for you. You must process every case like it's going to go to court. And that's kind of my summation for due process is you can't do it every now and then. When I have you go out and interview an AP about doing discipline, the thing that I hope you find is how long it takes to do it right. I hope that that's what the feedback that you get, how long it takes to do it right. There is no shortcut to it. And it's not easy. All right, I've interrupted long enough. Let's move on here.
So we would, if Bobby were to fail, would it be possible for him to participate online in summer school classes so that he wouldn't miss the entire baseball? That was just an idea.
Well, again, that's the ethic of care.
Yeah.
I like that. I mean, that shows that you're caring.
And so in the ethical paradigm of critique, this is having to do with hindrance, obstacles that might affect their fairness. In this situation, it was Bobby uncle who donates to the school and is an influential member of the community. These barriers should not get in the way of decision making. However, politics exists in schools and sometimes it affects the fairness. So we always have to ask ourselves about what are the politics that go along with some of these things. And then finally, profession. As a principal, you're held accountable to student academic success, and cheating would not be considered a success. In addition, the principal is to make decisions in the best interest of students, which can prove to be an internal conflict between code of conduct and what is actually best for Bobby. What legal action could have been taken to prevent him from failing, and then is there a compromise that offers both consequences and understanding? And that is the end of ours.
Okay, very good. You asked the right questions, and you were in the ballpark. But again, you did it from a teacher's perspective, which I like. Eventually, when I get through beating all the goodness out of you, you'll look at it like I do.
Yay!
You may not like that. I'm gonna tell you, you don't sleep as easily at night. But
Well, I gotta go.
We're gonna give it to you. So you only have yourself to blame for signing up for this. Very good. Thank you.
Out for tomorrow, so.
Okay. All right. Let me reclaim the host. Reclaim host. I am now the host. All right. Share. Let me go to share for mine. So that turns that one off. Go back here. Click on that. All right. Who's gonna be our next? Who's the next connection? Who's our
only one left
on the case study is wrong?
There's only one left.
We can go. My group can go.
All right. Who's gonna be? Give me a name.
Desiree.
Desiree's gonna. Oh, there we are. I'm gonna make you the host. Desiree Ball. I'm going to stop my share so it will let you. Where's Desiree? There you are. How's your thumb?
It's doing okay. I just redid the steri strips today, so it's looking a little rough, but hopefully it'll be all right.
So. Oh, good. I was telling my wife. She said she's got the feeling back in hers.
Yeah. Well, our group did this case when we were working with Dr. Laws, and we actually were more in line with what you said we should be from the administrative lens than we were this time. And basically, as I was rethinking our slides, we kind of put in there all the things in both texts that kind of led us to the teacher's lens from this conversation. So I'll kind of just start. We kind of lined this up based on things that we pulled out. And so basically we talked about how there's not necessarily clear course of action, but the things that he did is informing a superintendent. He could have investigated the amount of time that the baseball team consumes for players to try to understand the pressures that Bobby was expressing. And then also he should speak with the teacher to discuss the policies and grades. And the big thing that we really talked about when we were in Dr. Law's group is why was that one project worth such a high percentage of the student's grade? So we were actually kind of on track there. And then as we went back and looked through the different parts of the book, I feel like we kind of went actually the wrong direction a little bit. So as far as talking about the due process, the book talked about, was it the policy really clear? There was some wiggle room. If he used that wiggle room, then he may lose the trust relationship with some of his faculty. But he was basically facing that conflict between administrative duty of enforcing policies as well as what's the best decision for the student. In procedural, these are things that we took out of the book, which is, I guess, more of a discussion based, and we took it a little bit more literal. And it talked about that the principal was bound to adhere to the school policy despite the wiggle room clause. Otherwise, it could inflame the issue and cause some embarrassment based on perception and things like that. And also, as far as like the building on that perception that leaders may be immoral or corrupt, and applying different rules for different people. And then as far as talking about the arbitrary and capricious, I think that's where we went back to that, our initial response of the project being more than 50% of his grade was just not acceptable, not fair. That shouldn't have ever happened. And we did talk about how after this event happened that the principal should talk to that teacher about changing those grading policies so that this type of thing does not happen. And Shani, would you like to move into the ethical paradigms?
Yes, go ahead. There we go. I need to minimize the people so I can see. Fine, there we go. So some of the things we were also thought aligned. We discussed the fairness of the project and the honor code and the equity of the project. But I think every group kind of hit on that in the end. We were thrown off by that. The rules about Bobby were consistent with the student handbook. So I think our group completely missed the part about you can't fail a student based on one grade. So I'll probably write my reflection on that. Will you go to the next one? Okay. We were concerned, and I know we're always worried about building those teaching relationships with other teachers. So we were definitely concerned about how this would affect our relationship with the teacher, how that would affect our trust, our collaboration. We were almost leaning towards a shared decision, but it seems like this should have been pretty black and white. We should have just taken charge as the principal in charge. And we were also started to worry about that part they put in about Michael on the school board and sports and about how much that affected the community. We definitely went off a little bit to the left with that one, with the froze.
Got distracted by the things that were supposed to distract you.
Sure did, and we kept getting distracted. You'll see. Go ahead to the next slide. You'll see. We went off the deep end with that. I was like, well, what about nepotism then? What is Michael going to do with this school board? Like, oh no, we're going down. There's going to be a big fight type thing. So we really started looking at how much control can Michael have? Would that be an issue with nepotism? But also that if Bobby potentially having to attend summer school just for the one project, which didn't seem the incident, the offense, and the action all matched up.
Yeah, that's taking a shotgun to a fly.
Yeah, it seemed overkill, but we were also worried about his uncle overreacting.
Right.
So we didn't know how that would factor in.
Well, the thing to remember is all this stuff was there to distract you, but in the real world, any adult, if you just said to them, we're going to make this kid, we're going to fail him for the year. This is probably going to affect his ability to get in college. we're going to make him miss, his baseball, or we're going to make him go over summer school over one project. I mean, a rational person, the reasonable, when you go to court, and please don't be insulted, it's called the reasonable man theory. We're trying to substitute that out into the reasonable person theory. But one of the standards that when you go to court that you have to understand is the court will apply the reasonable man theory. I mean, would a reasonable man say that this was an adequate punishment or a just punishment for cheating on one assignment in school that you're basically wrecking this kid's whole life and future just to make the teacher feel good? Would a reasonable person say that that's okay? That's one of the standards that you have to achieve when you go to court, when you're looking at due process, arbitrary, capricious, zero tolerance, especially under the standard of capricious. Is this too much punishment for the crime? What would a reasonable person say a reasonable amount of punishment would be? And that's part of capricious. The reasonable man standard, and you can Google it. The reasonable man standard is part of the concept of capricious.
All right, and then this was when we finally finished going off the deep end. We then focused on what would that do to the team, because when you look at extracurricular activities, there's all kinds of different rules, regulations. I know, there's high school league rules as far as school policies with it. When we looked it up in our law book, it says it's a privilege, so I guess there should be follow up with that. But it also talks about how if it's too punitive, it's really going to negatively impact that child even more so, and the entire team.
That's correct.
And it talked about too the longevity of the consequence as well, and so that was something that, in retrospect, I think was a really important piece that we could have focused on.
This was the gift that kept on giving. I mean, this one just kept on going. I mean, you fail. You have to go to summer school. You miss your baseball. Probably not going to get into the college of your choice. I mean, where's this one going to end?
Right.
You're not going to playoffs, and your other team members are depending on that for their livelihood too.
Right.
I mean, it's the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah. When we first looked at this case, the first thing that we brought up was the fact that this one grade was going to count for so much. And then we started looking at all the other situations, and that's where we were going into our teacher mode with being undermined by the principal if he didn't follow through with her syllabus. And so we started off with thinking that the teacher wasn't wrong with the syllabus, but then we went off the deep end with all the other parts of it.
Yeah, we should have just stuck to our initial gut response that it was wrong. The grade percentage was completely wrong, because that's what my reflection that I wrote for Dr. Laws was about. It wasn't about sticking to the policy to keep the trust of teachers. It was about that shouldn't have happened to begin with.
Right.
And I think that I think that's where we should have stayed, or I know that's where we should have stayed.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is the perfect teachable time to understand the difference in the two lenses. You hear us referring to that all the time, and like these old guys, they just beat this same drum all the time about the lens and perspective. But there truly is a teacher perspective that teachers need to have, because they have more compassion and caring. But the lens from the administrative side is you got to follow the law, and your job is not to make teachers feel good and support them when they're wrong. You have to tell people when you have to have those critical conversations. We call them critical conversations now. In my era, we used to call them come to Jesus meetings, where you have to tell people you can't do that. Sorry, this is not we can't. I can't support you on this one. I love you like a sister, but I can't support you on this one.
Though the teacher's wrong with the syllabus, the principal should also have been aware of what
but that's part of it too, is you need to be, you're exactly right. The principal's got to do their due diligence to make sure that none of these exists. But that's the problem that you get into. Just like me, I've told you I have 23 people, 21 of them are adjuncts. that work with me in this program. And one of the things that I make sure that I do is I give them a common syllabus with the grading scale and the points total. Just like at the beginning, if you look on the course overview for this course, you'll see that I've got the grading scale and how much everything is worth. You notice you say, well, everything's worth the same, every one of the turn-ins. That way, no one turn-in will blow you out of the water. Everything that we have in this class is worth 100 points. I've done my due diligence, but I also make sure I have the same template. I do the course syllabi for all 5 of the blocks in the traditional program, and I have, since I've taken over doing this a few years back, we've stopped having so many challenges on grades. Because what would happen is some people thought the evidence artifact work should have been 95%, and others thought it should have been 5%. And we were always, they would have something that they liked, some project in their course that they really like, and they would assign so much value to it. If you failed it, you failed the course. And then we had some that, were putting too much emphasis on the evidence artifact work. And so, I went through and I rescaled everything where you can miss 2 or 3 assignments and still make your A. We've got it at a 90% level, but we haven't made anything worth so much that it fails you or causes you a letter grade miss on simply one project. There's enough wiggle room, and since they all count 100 points, if I gave you a 50 on one, you still have plenty of room to make an A. That's my responsibility as the principal of this group. You're exactly right. You need to make sure that you see the course syllabus for all your teachers and make sure that you had these all. It's a whole lot easier to deal with them before they happen than after. And so when I became department chair, a few years back, that's the first thing I did was standardize the syllabus and the grading. I was working, I was already doing the clinical piece, and I was getting 1,000 complaints a year on what grades were being given. And that's because we were doing it to ourselves. We were allowing instructors who were not full-time employees and didn't have a lot of control over them. We're allowing them to set up their own grading scheme. Some of them, that they just were arbitrary and did not make any sense. Now that things are standardized, it goes a whole lot smoother. But you're exactly right. The principal had a responsibility to do their due diligence here and didn't. That's exactly right. So it's, he can't blame anybody but himself for having to have that critical conversation with that teacher and break the bad news. Now, she's going to hate him, going to make a doll and stick pins in it, but he deserved it because he didn't do his due diligence. Don't complain about the whippings for the things that you did. The only time I ever complain about the thrashings that I get from my spouse are the things that she thinks I might do. I said, I do plenty of bad things. Get me for, thrash me for those things. Don't thrash me for the things that you think I might do. Well, that's kind of the way that leaders have to be. I mean, if you can head off the bad things, that there's not a lot of thrashings that have to be given. And that's the kind of relationship that as a servant leader, as a leader that inspires and motivates, you help people avoid problems rather than always, dealing with them or having to take action against them. Then you start working together. Then it's not an adversarial relationship. There doesn't have to be an adversarial relationship between teachers and administration. It just turns out that way because administrators a lot of times don't do the things that they need to do to be proactive in situations like this. You're exactly right. The grading scale should have been fixed up front, and we would have never gotten into this problem. All right. Is that it?
Yep, that's it.
All right. Excellent presentations all. Let me go back, and I want to make myself the host again. I am the host again, and I will share my screen, and we'll go back to my desktop. All right. Let me move this out of the way. Close Michelle presentation. Again, here are my top 10. This list is in your materials. And the thing to remember here, we'll talk about some of these other things, but some things that come to that are related to this course tonight, in this lesson tonight on due process. Student dress and publications can be regulated to avoid school disruption. Search and seizure. School staff has to have reasonable suspicion, which is a different standard than probable cause that the police have to have. Strip searches are not permitted by school personnel. That violates students' rights. Zero tolerance policies are not legal. Family Educational Privacy Act, that's part of due process as well. Arbitrary and capricious. The things that you see from 3 down speak to due process, students' rights, equal protection under the law, the 14th Amendment. Those are 3 through 10 on this list. They're a big part of the hot spots, the things that will get you in trouble in disciplinary reporting. We'll talk about that one later. But fully 7 or 8 of the things that you will have the most trouble with, that you're most likely to lose your job over, are related to due process. All right, let me move on. What time is it? Oh, we're doing well on time. All right, so let's look at next week. All right, so next week is about equity funding. You need to look carefully at the Leandro case. The Leandro case is started back in the 90s in North Carolina. It's how we got the lottery. In the end, Leandro case, the 5 low wealth districts sued the state and said that the way that you allot state money based on average daily membership, the same to everybody, every student in the state, is inherently inequitable, because some districts have the ability to add more money and spend more per pupil. It has thrashed around, but in the end, Leandro, the low wealth districts lost. There's going to be a revisit. There's another ruling coming down probably this month or next on Leandro, but they said we're not going to change the funding formula, but we will start a state lottery. We'll get in bed with this criminal element where we'll be able to have some pork barrel money for capital projects. North Carolina got out of capital projects in '66. We'll talk about that more later. But anyway, this one is about a superintendent deciding that he would do his own equity funding model, where he would give more money per pupil in some schools than others based on low wealth. And so the questions that you have, and so this is it here, case study 1. All right, and so review the Leandro case on school funding. Is the superintendent's plan appropriate? Present both sides of the issue. Do your PowerPoint. But is this one, the trick here is that this one, what does the law say about these kinds of plans? What did Leandro say? Is this legal? Is it appropriate? Can he do this? Should he do this? And the distraction on this one is race and class, economic. That's the distraction. Go back to the law. Go back to the Leandro case, which is, Leandro is just not an exemplar for North Carolina. It's a national case. You can go back as far as Robinson versus Cahill, Serrano versus Priest. You can look at all these cases on school funding. And then in light of the legal precedent set, make a decision. The teacher in you will want to say it's the right thing to do to try to help those poor kids. And that's what I would expect, the humanitarian teacher side of all of us to say. But I want you to look at it from the administrative side. Is he going to be, if he gets challenged in court on this, is he going to win? Can he differentiate based on low wealth? According to the Leandro case. Don't look at it. I'm kind of letting the cat out of the bag for you on this one. I'm being a little better to you. Don't look at it through a teacher lens. Look at it from the administrator lens. Is it legal? Is it ethical? Present both sides of the issue, what the argument would be, but make a final determination. Should or could or will he or what's going to happen if he does? Tell, kind of project down the road, but make it, pick a side, present both sides, but tell us whether it's appropriate that he should do it or not. Argue both sides, but in the end come to a conclusion based on the Leandro case. And as I said, you can look at Serrano and you can look at Robinson versus San Antonio if you need further clarification beyond the Leandro case. All right. So everybody understands what we're going to be doing next week? Y'all did a good job tonight. Don't feel bad at all. You did what I would hope you would do, that you would look at it from a compassionate teacher standpoint. But eventually, if you hang around me long enough, I'll rub off on you, and you won't be near as good a person. I'll just tell you, I have that effect on people. But I'm very pleased with your presentations tonight. I really enjoy working with you. You have such a good perspective, and so we stop the share. All right. What's next? Anything else for the good of the group tonight? Anybody that needs to share anything with us before we go? I see my bell she had to go at 7, so everybody else is here. Any questions on anything? Look at us. We finished 8 minutes early. Now I want y'all to make sure you tell Dr. Laws we finished 8 minutes early. He said that it couldn't be done. You make sure you tell him that we didn't go our whole 2 hours tonight, that we finished at 7:52. I'll see you next week. Y'all have a good week. Thank you.
Thank you. You too.